Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Shabbat Shalom, Rabbi.
I'd like to give you a glimpse of one of the more meaningful moments of my week. So many of us in our community participated in the Cafe Europa project, where we raised money and then distributed Passover goods to Holocaust survivors that depend on Jewish family services and are members of Cafe Europa throughout the Los Angeles area. The efforts of this synagogue and of friends of the synagogue resulted in our ability to distribute over 125 boxes and take care of the Passover needs, or at least help take care of the Passover needs of 125 survivors in Los Angeles. And then on Thursday, Cafe Europa asked me to speak at their annual Yom HaShoah program, which is comprised of the Cafe Europa Prevailer community and board members and donors. And there are cantors and musicians that play klezmer music and that sing Yiddish songs, and it's a very moving experience. This year, a request came through to me through the executive director of Cafe Europa. Could I please speak on the topic of righteous Gentiles? Because this particular survivor who made the request, she had been saved by a righteous Gentile, and she recognizes that as the generation of prevailers of the Shoah pass, the same generation of righteous Gentiles are also passing, and we don't often give them the kavod as a community that they deserve. The request, in all honesty, struck me as so special. And of course, this is what I wrote and talked about on Thursday afternoon. As I've explained here many times before, I explained to the Cafe Europa community that I'm a grandchild of 4 survivors, and I explained that I usually use the term prevailer, not survivor. My grandparents were prevailers, their friends were prevailers, and when they were together, they always told stories. So as a child, my dinner table was filled with stories from the war. I heard about family members who were murdered, the Lodz ghetto, the concentration camps, the Soviet front, the displaced persons camp after the war in Germany. I heard about Nazis and about Christian neighbors who willingly participated in Poland and Czechoslovakia. I never heard once as a child, not one time, of a non-Jewish person who helped during the war. My parents joined a group called Children of Survivors of the Holocaust in Chicago. And they helped, in the Chicago Jewish community, bring speakers about the Shoah to synagogues and day schools. Then one year, a woman came to stay at our home for Yom HaShoah. Her name was Irene Good Updike. She was a righteous Gentile, recognized by Yad Vashem, with a tree in her name at Yad Vashem in Jerusalem on the Avenue of the Righteous. She stayed in our home, and all of my grandparents came over to meet her, and all of us sat around the dinner table together and enjoyed dinner. To say that we all stared at her like we were spotting some kind of rare species is a complete understatement. I was probably 9 or 10 years old at best, at oldest. And she told her entire story at the table in English and Polish. she tried to use Polish to shield the kids at the table from some of the details. My grandparents would hear the Polish, turn around, and immediately translate it into English for us so that we understood what was happening. She explained how, as a Polish nurse and as a person of faith, she recognized the value of life and the need to risk her own in order to save Jews. She smuggled food to Jews in the ghetto, and later she hid Jews in her cellar. When a Nazi officer discovered her secret, he threatened to turn her in unless she became his mistress. I'll never forget, I was a young child, but she turned to us and said, when I was younger, I was a very beautiful woman. As a child, my eyes were opened wide as this rarest of person explained how she would give herself, quite literally her body, for the pleasure of this officer in exchange for the right to protect these holy lives hiding downstairs in her home. And this became her reality over and over and over again as the war progressed for years. Not long after this dinner, my family traveled to Israel and visited Yad Vashem, of course, for the first time. And we walked the Avenue of the Righteous Among the Nations, which is a large walkway that connects two areas of the Yad Vashem Museum campus. And I stopped with respect, looking at this tree planted there with Irene Good Updike's name on the plaque at its base, who risked her life for our people, who sat at our kitchen table. The recognition paid to these extraordinary people by the state of Israel is so well deserved, because as the majority of Europe, the mainstream, as they watched and they benefited from the murder and the plunder of the Jewish people, the righteous among the nations risked their lives to save our brothers and sisters, our mothers and fathers, our aunts and uncles, our cousins. As of 2020, Yad Vashem has recognized approximately 27,000 righteous among the nations. It seems like a lot of people. It's an overwhelming number. They break it down on their website country by country if you'd like to look at it. It's really not that overwhelming once you think about it within the population of Europe. If we assume, to use round numbers, that the population of Europe at the end of approximately during the war was approximately 500 million people, it means that righteous Gentiles made up 1/2 of 1/100th of 1% of the population. To quantify it clearly, the population of the righteous among the nations was 0.0054% of the general population, the absolute rarest of people of their time. So I was asked to bring a blessing for these righteous among the nations, to remember them. What kind of blessing can we offer as Jews to people who we can't do enough to thank in person, to people who we look at like the rarest of jewels? My mind went to one particular blessing that is not used for this purpose, to my knowledge, ever. Our sages teach us in a very complicated story in the Talmud, in Masechet Ta'anit, that we are to bless God when we see somebody who looks different, who looks strange, who looks misshapen, out of place. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, mishaneh habriot. Blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who creates a variety of types of people. I'd argue that this blessing fits this exact scenario. Thank you, God, for creating some people who are different than the mainstream, with a different moral compass, one that points toward righteousness even when the rest of humanity has descended to darkness. They seem totally misshapen, out of place for their time. And yet, in God's infinite wisdom, these righteous were created and placed out of place, out of context, in that dark place, in that dark time. Sometimes today, especially today, when society is so sharply divided, polarized, it's easy to feel like the differences between a people are a problem. Locked in partisan divide constantly of 51% to 49%. It feels so frustrating. I feel so frustrated. But we have to remember sometimes how dangerous it can be when more than 99.99% of the population agrees on something, especially when they all agree on evil. In memory of all of the prevailers, in memory of all of the victims, in memory of all of the righteous, that they should all be remembered and honored, each with the dignity that each of their individual beautiful souls deserve. Thank you, God, for permitting us to know them. Thank you for permitting us these righteous neighbors for the Jewish people. Then, now, and always. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, mishaneh habriot. Shabbat shalom, everybody.